When I was growing up, most years my mom took Easter Sunday off from her church work. She was a director of religious education. And we went to stay at my grandparents' house in Vermont. We went to worship with my grandmother on Easter Sunday. She was a member of a tiny American Baptist and United Church of Christ federated congregation. Each year, a feature of their worship was the choir. They wore pastel turtlenecks, everybody had a different color, under albs, which are those robes that sort of pin by the neck and sort of look like a burlap sack. And they had cinctures, belts that looked like rope, that were tied around their waists. And they performed each year the same thing, a liturgical dance to a Dolly Parton gospel song, going up and down the aisles. I don't remember anything else from the service. But the dance has lasted in my mind for 40 years. It was the moment that seemed the most celebratory, the most in connection with the message of the day, with joy in resurrection. At that time, most of what I knew of the Easter story I had learned from musicals like Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar, which focus more on the story leading up to the resurrection. The story of a prophet losing his life for what he believes in. Most Unitarian Universalists don't believe in the bodily resurrection of Christ. In fact, that's the historically defining theological tenet of Unitarianism. However, today I want to explore what draws people back to these ancient stories again and again. In 2013, Bruce Feiler published an excerpt from his book, The Secrets of Happy Families, as an article in the New York Times, and it became the most read thing he ever did. It's quoted all over the place, including in a sermon from a colleague that was shared with me this week, for which I am grateful. In the article, he describes the work of Dr. Marshall Duke. Duke was researching American families in the 1990s and studying resilience in children. He and his wife developed a series of 20 questions that they asked children. Things like, do you know how your parents met? Or, do you know which person in the family you act most like? And so on. To see if folks had a family narrative and if it was shared across generations. Because their research was ongoing when 9/11 happened, they were able to go back to the same families and reassess the children to see how they were managing after a shared traumatic experience. They were able to determine what we might intuit, that the children who knew more about their families proved to be more resilient, meaning they could moderate the effects of stress. They also found that children who have the most self-confidence have what he and Dr. Feibusch called a strong intergenerational self. They knew that they belonged to something bigger than themselves. Duke and Feibusch were studying families, but I think what they found is true of any community that gathers around shared stories. Our pagan foreparents told stories that made meaning of the world around them. They told stories of death and rebirth, the cycles of seasons, and of goddesses like Inanna, Ishtar, and Persephone. We can see the bones of these old stories of ancient gods and goddesses in the story of Jesus' death and resurrection, and in the symbols of Easter eggs and bunnies. Today, our Jewish friends and family are in the midst of the celebration of Passover. Passover celebrates the story of liberation of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. In Exodus, God commands the Jewish people to observe this rite as a perpetual ordinance for you and your children. The celebration of Passover is largely focused on the home. It involves clearing one's home of all non-kosher for Passover food and many, many family dinners and celebrations. After thousands of years, each Passover, Jewish families continue to share stories of slavery and freedom, and remember these stories not only with words and celebration, but with symbolic food that they can touch and taste and smell, like matzah and bitter herbs. It's also a tradition to invite in a stranger to share in the Seder, And as I mentioned before, many in our congregation had the honor of joining our Ava Shalom neighbors in the second Seder this past week. Much of the Passover celebration is remembering and telling the story of the Jewish people, and offers a time for reflection on history and tradition, as well as the present. In the Christian tradition, each year at Easter, congregations remember and retell the story of Jesus' death and resurrection. In the Gospels, the resurrection is proven to the disciples in many different ways, but each year his disciples are shown again that he is Christ by watching him do things like catch fish and make and eat breakfast on a beach, or break bread. In the Christian death and resurrection story, what Jesus overcomes is not just death, but also oppression. It's also a liberation story. His story has been used in civil rights struggles since the writing of the Gospels to inspire people to fight for what they believe in and to show the story of what his followers worked to build after his death, however imperfectly. Looking back to Dr. Duke's research on resilience, he also found that for the children and families who had not only known and shared their stories, but whose stories included times of success and failure, were the most resilient. When we share stories of when we make mistakes and get back up again, or cause harm and then work to make it right, we show a fuller picture of being human. One of the challenges that my Christian colleagues report struggling with in the Easter story is that many folks want to skip right past the hard parts, especially Good Friday, and go right to the resurrection. I don't think that's our challenge in Unitarian Universalism. I think our challenge is looking for the hope in the story. As someone who is not Christian myself, the hope in the Easter story is not in the resurrection, but in the women at the tomb. Even though the tomb was watched by Roman authorities, because remember, the angel scares the guards, so there were guards there, they show up to do the rituals associated with mourning. And depending on the story, which gospel you're reading, when they are visited by Jesus himself or an angel of the Lord, despite their fear, they run to tell their community and keep the story going. The disciples often get things wrong. They struggle, they doubt, they worry, and they are so human in those stories. They're there for us to find ourselves as well, to help us remember that there is no such thing as perfect action or belief. Unitarian Universalists do not have a unifying text or prophet, but we are supported by these sacred stories and the many other prophets before and since who spoke for love and liberation. Remembering together and telling our stories can help us navigate times of hopelessness and struggle. Things have seemed lost before, and folks who shared identities, values, and stories with us found their way through. This year, the stories we share and remember for Passover and Easter of suffering, liberation, state violence, and speaking truth to power are just as relevant as they were 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. And that's part of the power of ancient stories. They are told again and again, and we can hear them differently each time. We tell stories that share our beliefs in love, compassion, the interconnection of all living things, and the inherent worth of all people. We repair the world, build justice and compassion together. When you leave today, I encourage you to look, whether you're at home or here, look for the growing things, for the buds and blooms and bugs that remind us that life begins anew. Transformation is all around us, and we can remember that out of death comes new life. Sharing Reverend Robbie Walsh's words again, may his memory be as a blessing. The stories make it clear that God does not do it alone. The motions of the spheres will produce a sunrise, but the springtime of the Spirit, the springtime of love and justice and peace, depends on our human response to the gift of life. Let us tell the stories again. Amen, and so may it be.